Hi there, and welcome to Grocket.com and the GRE series of videos. My name's Jim Jacobson. I'll be your host for this series of videos on how to do well on the GRE Verbal. I've actually been teaching test prep for, 10, 12 years. 12 years, actually. I started right before the year 2000. So I've helped a lot of people do better on the test, and so I'll be giving you a variety of tips, tricks, and strategies for doing better on the verbal section of the exam. Part of that involves, of course, going over what the exam involves, and then going into how it works, what types of questions you'll get, and then getting into some strategies, modeling what you'll be doing on different question types, and and of course, showing you the differences between the new and the old GRE in the event that you've been studying for the old one, or maybe did the old one before and now are getting set to retake the new one. So today's lesson is introduction to that overall, GRE verbal section, and starting to talk about reading comprehension. In terms of how this fits into our overall agenda, my hidden agenda is about to become no longer hidden. This is my agenda right here. So the course schedule, lesson 1, we're going to start with that GRE verbal stuff, reading comp. We're going to cover reading comp part 2. The reason we're doing it in 2 parts is that there's more than one question type, there's more than 2 question types, and to give full weight to how you do the reading comp passages in the best way possible, we split it up into 2 parts. We'll then be covering the sentence equivalence questions and the text completion questions, and giving you some tips about how to do those as well. So, and of course, at the end of each lesson, there will be homework. That's what this says right here. There's homework and practice questions. And of course, all of these questions are tagged with certain titles. Those are the titles that you can use to create custom practice sessions on Grocket, so that if there's a particular thing that you really do want to practice more, you can totally do that, and should totally do that before the test. So what is on the verbal section, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you. So the structure is, it's 2 sections, and it's half an hour per section. So in terms of endurance, though it's not terribly long, it is, however, 20 questions per section, which, when you take into account the time that it's going to take you to read the things, could make it feel a little bit tight, time-wise. So, there is incentive to master these question types and learn to move quickly and efficiently through them. Excuse me. Your score will be from 130 to 170 in 1-point increments, and that's all there is to it. Of course, if that actually really were all there were to it, we wouldn't have 4 videos. There would just be this little 2-minute thing telling you, hey, that's all there is to it, go to it, everyone gets their awesome score. So, content-wise, so these are the 3 major question types. We have the reading comp, which have little passages attached, and there are 3 question types, and each of those passages has between 1 and 5 paragraphs. You will run into some very short reading comprehension passages, as well as a few considerably longer ones. So, and your strategy, of course, does differ. The more stuff from the passage that you're going to have to keep in your head, depending on the questions. Text completions, you'll have between 1 and 5 sentences with 1 to 3 blanks in those sentences, and you have to fill in what goes in there. And then sentence equivalence, it'll be 1 sentence with 1 blank, and then you have to choose 2 answers that are each equivalent. Not only does each answer fit in the question in question, but they also match each other. So that's one of the new ways that vocabulary has made its way into the GRE, or that vocabulary has stayed in the GRE, is through sentence equivalence. So things not covered, analogies. If you studied for the GRE before, you may remember that these were things like dog is to puppy, and then you'd have as cat is to, and then the right answer would be kitten. So analogies are out. That sort of completely pure vocabulary testing thing and relationships between words testing thing, that's no longer in there. They're now in context, which is why you have text completions and sentence completions. Antonyms, likewise, you might get the just a single word. You get a single word as your question type, like a word like noisome, and then you would have to choose the opposite. Which word means the opposite? And so, one of the choices might be awesome. and I guess, well, I don't know, I'm stretching it a little bit. Noisome means annoying, awesome means awesome. So awesome is sort of the opposite of noisome. I made this up. This isn't really an old GRE question, but you get the idea. So analogies, antonyms, and then sentence completions, you had to fill it in with the correct word. These were relatively close to the sentence equivalence ones, although with sentence equivalence, you just have to match two answer choices and match them with the sentence, whereas sentence completion, you had to just plug in the one word that matched the tone and meaning of what else was going on. So they've given you more context, less emphasis on just straight up memorizing lists of words. This is not to say that vocabulary does not play a part on the GRE. It absolutely does. On those question types we just talked about, you could get weird words in reading comprehension. You could certainly get them in, and when I say weird, I mean just less commonly used. You could get them in your text completions and sentence equivalence. So that's where vocabulary now lives, but you now have more context. So as you learn your words, and we'll talk about that, as you learn your vocabulary words, pay attention to context, because that's going to help you even more. All right, so how can you quickly improve GRE verbal? This is the other reason we're doing reading comp first, is because that's the hardest one to improve in a short period of time, because it's based more on what kind of reader you've been throughout your life. Of course, the tips we'll give you that absolutely will help you, but that's the one that you should start on first, which is why we're starting you on it first. In terms of other stuff, starting a vocab journal. Think like a thesaurus. So what this means is keep a list of words that you run into in everyday life, in your reading if you're still in school. If you're doing any advanced reading on your chosen field, go look for articles, go look for books on the topic. And when you come across words you don't know, keep a journal of them. And then when you look up those words, look for other words that mean similar sorts of things. I'm not talking about technical jargon in your field, because that's unlikely to appear on the GRE. Specific terms that have a very specific meaning in your field. The GRE is a general test. They're not going to give you a computer science or a history or a chemistry specific term, because not everyone, in fact, most people taking the test are not there for the same reason you are. They will give you words with multiple meanings, but they won't use the jargony ones. No, I mean more words that are used that are not field specific, but are still words you don't know. Words that you might run into in literary contexts in particular, because literary types are the types who are more likely to use those words. So starting a journal, keeping track, and then you can use that as a basis for studying, and eventually you'll have all of those new words that were new to you. They'll be old news, and you'll be using them like a pro. Another huge tip, and this one, I think people often underrate this one, because, how can reading help? Oh, that sounds silly. But reading for half an hour every day, even if it's before bed and puts you to sleep, although ideally you'd be reading actively along the lines that we're going to be talking about later, but reading for 30 minutes a day does a couple things for you. One, it puts you in contact with these types of words that you're going to need to know and probably wouldn't run into just on your own in your own personal things you do for fun. Number two, it actually has you reading every day. Your current life may not have you reading every day, or the reading that you're doing may not be particularly scholarly. I mean, I'm not knocking whatever it is that you have on your nightstand shelf that that you're reading, but if it's not of a scholarly material, you're less likely to run into things that you're less likely to run into learning opportunities by reading, Twilight or People magazine. So you can still read those things. Reading is good for you kids, but we want you to run into new words. So 30 minutes every day, and if you do that, the other good thing about this is that you're actually studying every day. And I notice a lot of people, they tend to put off their studying for a really long time. They wait until, I have to take the GRE in 2 weeks. I have to take it on Saturday. They do that. And some of them, of course, do fine on their first one. So if that's you, don't panic. You might still do fine. But if you don't and have to take it again, if you have a longer preparation arc, and if you do at least this reading every day, if the rest of the day just doesn't go well, you don't get any other studying done, you can still say, hey, I did something for the test, so you don't have that guilt-driven thing where I'll just study for 10 hours on this coming weekend, which never happens. Or it happens once and you're so scarred that you never do it again. So studying every day especially doing this reading every day, helps you build capacity, helps you, run into these words and practice putting things into context, especially, if it's scholarly articles on things that are not your own field. It'll be a little bit tougher to put things into context. Don't make it so scholarly and so outside your field that you have no idea what's going on. That's not going to help you. But anyway, I said enough about reading. I just think it's a good idea, and it's an easy way to study. Maybe even more fun way to study than, for example, making flashcards. On the other hand, and you probably already know what sort of person you are in this regard. Some people love flashcards. They will, study them on their morning commute if they're not driving, because that's naughty. They'll study them over lunch. They'll study them while they're on hold with somebody. They love flashcards. Other people, I'm in the, I don't really like flashcards very much. I don't have much success with them. I have more success with the things where I'm reading and writing things out as opposed to just looking at cards again and again. But they can help, and there are still lists out there of, the top, however many, top 200, 1,000 GRE words that you need to know. You should make sure that you know those, because those are the types of ones that not only will they show up, or not only are they likely to show up somewhat on the GRE, they're actually fairly commonly used words in the real world in higher levels of writing. So if there's any words in there that you don't know, it'll help you in grad school. So learn those. You can memorize common roots, prefixes, and suffixes. You don't necessarily have to do what I did, which is go to all the trouble of learning Greek and Latin. To be fair, I did not actually do that just to prepare for the GRE, but learning a few roots and prefixes and suffixes can help you identify the meanings of words that you don't know, at least telling whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because you notice the middle of a root. You may also brush up on whatever foreign language you know, if it's one that feeds into English, because some of those roots may have something in common with English words, so you may notice a part of a word that looks familiar, based on other languages that you know. And then, of course, there are GRE and general vocabulary apps online, and download some of those so you can practice them. It's sometimes they're just electronic flashcards, but sometimes they're more elaborate means of practicing vocabulary. Do some of those. There's nothing that says your studying has to be sitting in front of a book for 6 hours straight, 6 days a week. Doing a variety of things, scheduling a variety of tasks, and doing it every day, doing a mixture of these every day, is going to improve your verbal proficiency no matter what you do. Even if you don't want it to, if you do these things, it's going to improve your verbal proficiency if you do them right. So that's the way to improve. I mean, the short answer, of course, is really all you're doing is practicing, but you're practicing in a variety of ways and in a variety of useful ways. So that's how you do it. Let's move on. So these reading comp question types, which is not the same thing as these are more format types than question types, because we're going to talk about the specific question types, but these are the formats. So the first format number 1, multiple choice questions with one single answer. This is probably, if you've never seen a multiple choice question where you have to choose a single answer, I don't know what to tell you. Lucky you, I guess. It's a very common testing format where you have a number of answer choices and one of them is correct. You must identify the correct answer, select it, confirm it, and move on. So 5 answer choices, select one. The new one on this new GRE is multiple choice questions with one or more answer choices correct. There will be 3 answer choices. One or more of the answer choices may be correct. It may still be only one that's correct, but it may be 2 or 3 of them that are correct. And you get no credit for partially correct answers. So if you select 1 and your 1 was one of the 2, that's just as wrong as if you selected 2, one of which was the 1 correct answer. So if you mark something wrong in any way on that question, the whole thing's wrong. You don't get partial credit. So it's trickier. And then finally, to save people kind of the trouble, because in real life when you're reading things, you are identifying things in context in the passage as opposed to looking over at a question and then looking back. So now there's a select in passage question type where you have to select a sentence in the passage that matches the description or does the specified function in the question. So and they'll be highlighted for you so you'll know which ones to click. But you have to select the correct one. So it's tricky. All right. right, so here's an example of one of these multiple choice select one ones. It's worded like this. The passage implies which of the following about the current cost of generating electricity. Now, again, we didn't do the passage, so we're not really going to do the question, but note that there are 5 answer choices, A, B, C, D, E, and then the answer here is C, so we would click this, confirm it, and move on to the next question. We would read all of the answer choices, always, just to be extra sure. I mean, they're not that long, so, I mean, you have time to actually read questions and read answers, but you would select this one and move on. With select one or more, it'll be something like the passage suggests that extensive use of sequestration over time would over time have which of the following consequences. Now, sometimes it'll say, sometimes it'll just say which of the following, which is open-ended. It doesn't necessarily mean a single answer choice. But it may also allude to there being more than one answer choice. The way that you know that it's select one or more is that there's only 3 answer choices, 5 versus 3. Here, the answer is B. Again, we didn't do the passage, but and just because it's select one or more does not mean that it cannot be one. That's why it's called select one or more. One answer can be the right one, and that's what's going on in this one. It could have just as easily been 2 or all 3 answer choices, though, on this one. So there's no, at least at this point, there's no known proportion of, most of the time it's 2 or, anything like that. It's too early to tell. You should just go based on what you understand the passage to say. That's actually the best strategy in general anyway, as opposed to trying to second guess what the GRE is doing. Knowing the answer is always the best strategy. So yeah, write that one down. All right, so select in passage. Select the sentence that explains why an outcome of sequestration that might have been expected would not occur. And then the answer would be this sentence. So here, it doesn't affect the cost of electricity transmission, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so again, we didn't do it for real. So you would select the sentence, select it, confirm it, and then move on. All right, so general tips on reading comprehension. Number 1, and I alluded to this one already, read all the answer choices, no kidding. You may be sure that the one you just read is a right answer, but one that you have not yet read may be better, in fact. A lot of these answer choices, or a lot of these questions, will be which one best describes the main idea. And so there may be one that's kind of close and could be tempting, but you won't know how tempting the others are until you look at them. So read all the answer choices, especially on the choose one or more. If you can't be bothered to read 3 answer choices, well, I guess if you're in a hurry and are just trying to finish the test, that's okay. You're just guessing, so you actually finish. But otherwise, there's no excuse to not read all the answer choices, okay? So read them. Number 2, make sure your answer choice accurately and completely answers the specific question posed. I see this happen a lot, actually, where people skim the question and, I kind of remember something about this part in the passage. This must be the right answer. Know that the test makers know that people do this, and they will make answer choices that have something reminiscent of what was going on in the passage, but then parts of the answer choice make it veer off into some other crazy direction, and little spacemen come out with ray guns, and it's like totally not anything to do with what was going on with the passage. So make sure that you're actually answering the question, and make sure that you have support for your answer in the passage. And that's this beware of half-right answer choices. If you read the first half of the answer choice and you're saying, yeah, that sounds good, that must be it, make sure you read the rest of it. It's very, very common for them to have part of the passage be something very similar. Either it is something that is a correct concept, or they'll use similar terminology from what appeared in the terminology similar to what appears in the passage, so that if you're skimming for familiar words, the question will look half right, but it may say something completely opposite of what the passage did. So watch out for that. That's my big tip. Watch out for that. Great advice, huh? No, okay. Anyway, back to the real stuff. So don't use outside knowledge. You know some stuff. You wouldn't be going to graduate school if you didn't. So, and you may actually know a fair amount about a variety of things through your majors, through your personal reading, through your interests. Using outside knowledge, it's good to some extent if a passage is kind of in your area of expertise, you'll have less trouble understanding unusual. You'll know who certain people are when they're mentioned. You'll understand what historical events are referenced. You'll understand the scientific concept involved or the social science theory. So that's nice. What you don't want to do is use outside knowledge to read more into the passage than is actually in there. If the author agrees with something and you know that most of the scholarship actually disagrees with what the author is saying, leave that at the door. That will kill you, because that's something that they can and will do to you in the answer choices. Give you something that give you answer choices that are tempting if you know more about the subject or you read a little bit too much into what's being said. So using outside knowledge, it's good for a comfort level, but actually using it to determine answer choices rather than what's in the passage is the really bad part. So they may give some, I'm just trying to think of, just pretend it's a common health topic, whatever is current at the time that you're watching this video, something that's in the news, a current health issue that people are talking about, and they found that some certain food helps with that. The food is not mentioned in the passage, but then it appears in the answer choices. And you say, aha, it's been proven that food helps with that health issue. But if it's not in the passage, you can't pick it. Okay, so that's about as specific as I can get about this outside knowledge thing. But basically, your answer needs to be in the passage. Finally, read critically and carefully. Don't skim. I wish I had some arbitrary amount of money for every time someone has said, oh man, I'm really not doing well on reading comprehension. And this isn't even necessarily like non-native speakers of English. This is native speakers of English. Man, I thought I was a good reader, but these reading comp passages are killing me, and I'm just not getting them, and a lot of the time, I would say at least half the time, what's actually happening is that they're skimming the passage for the answer. The GRE test makers know that this is how people are going to do it. They choose familiar terminology from the passage. They pick things, answers that are correct but from the wrong part of the passage, so not actually answering the question, answering some other question that wasn't being asked. They'll catch you if you skim. Guaranteed. They are guaranteed to catch you if you skim, unless you have an eidetic memory and a photographic memory. You can just look at the thing and it's completely absorbed in a split second. If you're that person, that's cool, but that's not really skimming. That's not what we're talking about. Skimming is when you look for a term you kind of read the question, and then you just kind of quickly go through lines to see what part sounds good, and as soon as you hit something that sounds familiar and matches an answer choice, you pick it, and then you get it wrong. Not that you're always going to get it wrong, but skimming will kill you. So reading critically and carefully, which is what we're about to talk about, is key. Okay, so the passage map. Passage map, aka taking notes. So notes help you to think critically. Because you have to pause for a moment to summarize things and put them into or summarize your thoughts and put them into brief phrases, that forces you to think very critically about what's going on, distilling what's important from what isn't. Avoid summary. You shouldn't be putting in your notes a complete summary of what happens in every paragraph. You don't have time to do that. You need to put some very specific things down, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Don't spend too much time on details. You can go back for them later. Yeah, the passage is there the whole time when you have these questions in front of you. So you don't have to remember in what year the War of 1812 was fought. If you actually have to look that up, it's in the passage. So, or if it isn't, you don't need to know it at all. So don't worry about the details. Know where they are, because if they ask you, you are going to be going back for it if you don't remember it. But don't try to remember it all, especially with longer passages. Writing in shorthand, not in full sentences. You don't have to capitalize. You don't have to punctuate, except to the extent that it allows you to reread your notes. So whatever personal abbreviations you want to use are cool, are fine. Nobody's going to see them except you. Finally, know what you're looking for before you read. That's where knowing what sorts of things you're taking notes on helps a lot. So you're not just taking notes randomly, you're taking the same types of notes every time. And the same is true of questions. If you have a question that's going to force you to go back to the passage, know what it is that you're looking for before you go back to it. Excuse me. Okay, so this is the reading comp strategy for shorter passages, and you will be, doing some shorter passages. First is finding the topic. which is just the overall one or two word. This is the most general heading. If you were going to the bookstore or the library for a book on this topic, what section would it be in? Finding the focus, the specific aspect of the topic that the author is interested in. So the author is focusing on one or two particular breeds of dogs. So the topic might be dogs, and the focus might be beagles. I like beagles, even though they're kind of barky. All right. So the author's point of view. It is important to know whether the author is in favor of, against, or neutral about the topic. So what's the author? What does the author think about this? Does the author like this thing? Not like it? So the author, we know that the author loves dogs. That's a smiley face. It's supposed to be. Now it looks evil. Okay, never mind. Other people will use pluses and minuses. You can do whatever you want, as long as you aren't writing out long words. And then finding the intention, what is the author intending to do with this passage? Is the author intending to explain? Is the author intending to persuade? We'll talk about all of these things in more depth. And taking notes on these things can really help you, not only in the act of having things to refer to, but in the act of actually taking the notes, the topic, focus, point of view, and intention of the passage. All will be just better encoded in your brain. You may not have to refer back to your notes, but in the act of taking them, you implanted them more firmly in your mind, and so you can just move through the questions quickly. All right. So the main idea, or the topic, so it'll be a general noun, often in the first sentence, not always, but that's the most common place for it to appear. One or two words max. That's the section of the library or bookstore that it's in. And what you're kind of following is an inverted triangle from the most general to the most specific aspects of the passage. Starting off with the main idea, going to the focus, and then finally what the purpose or intention was of that focus. So main idea, one or two words. The focus, what about the main idea, is interesting to the author, and it narrows it down. Like I said, going from dogs to two specific breeds of dogs, or one specific breed of dogs, and why they make good house pets or why they don't. So it'll be a narrowing of the main idea. The intention is why the author wrote the passage, to persuade you that drugs are bad, to warn you of the dangers of a new ice age, to explain a certain social theory. All of these things are possible purposes, some of which involve the author having a point of view that the author is trying to push out to you, and other ones where the author is being fair and balanced and saying some people think this, some people think this, and there's no clue what the author actually thinks. So, and then this intention is likely to appear in thesis statements or concluding summations. Basically, again, the beginning and end of the passage. Shorter passages, it may even only be one paragraph. It may be the first and last sentences of the paragraph. So look for those. What is the author's point of view? And again, the reason why this is so important is that when you're asked big idea questions, like what's the idea of this passage? So wrong answer choices will include something that's not the author's point of view. So if you know that the author wasn't trying to convince you of anything, an answer choice that says that the author was trying to argue some particular case, you can say, thank you for playing, pitch it out. So, vote that answer choice off the island. So, what does the author like and dislike? It may be more than one thing. So the author may like and dislike whatever the main topic is, but the author also may like and dislike some other things. May dislike a particular critic, or like a particular critic, but still agree with the thing that the critic was critical of. Anyway, keeping track of what the author likes is important. Look for the adjectives and adverbs, plus and minus, or smileys and frownies. I don't know. I like them both. The main reason I use the smileys and frownies is that sometimes my pluses end up looking like T's or something, and I don't want to get confused. But that's because I'm sloppy. So if you're a neat person, you can just use pluses and minuses. Whatever your favorite thing is. Make it short, though. And then the author's point of view can be neutral or scholarly. Lots of them will be, but you do need to detect which ones are and which ones aren't. All right, so here's an example passage. So we're going to do an example of reading actively here. Okay, so and I'm going to read it through with you, well, for you, really, and point out what bits of information end up being useful. So policymakers must confront the dilemma that fossil fuels continue to be an indispensable source of energy, even though burning them produces atmospheric accumulations of carbon dioxide that increase the likelihood of potentially disastrous global climate change. So there seems to be something about a dilemma with fossil fuels, and maybe something about carbon dioxide, because I can see in the next sentence that it says, currently technology that would capture carbon dioxide emitted by power plants and sequester it harmlessly underground or undersea instead of releasing it into the atmosphere might double the cost of generating electricity. So there's this thing about technology here and sequestering carbon. But because sequestration does not affect the cost of electricity transmission and distribution, delivered prices will rise less by no more than 50%. Research into better technologies for capturing carbon dioxide will undoubtedly lead to lower costs. So if we were to deal with, so talking about these things, I think this is actually where I can highlight some of those things. Hey, look at that. Yeah. So the dilemma is, in fact, the dilemma of fossil fuels is one of the things that we have to worry about. The fossil fuel dilemma. What do we do about it? What specific aspect of this fossil fuel dilemma do we care about? That's the focus of the passage. Well, we hear about technology for it, and then we also find about this particular thing that doubles the cost. So our focus is the tech costs, specifically related to sequestering the carbon dioxide. The author's point of view is that capturing and sequestering is costly, but that delivery rises less. So the author thinks that this is something that will happen. Excuse me. So when the author makes a prediction, that's part of the author's point of view. If the author is citing, sources or evidence, it's not necessarily the author's point of view. But if the author just makes an outright claim about what will happen, the author is actually making some predictions about what's going to happen. So this is what the author thinks will happen: that it might double the cost, and that the delivered prices will rise less by no more than 50%. So those are some things to note, and then. Therefore, the intent is probably perhaps to argue that more research should be done to reduce the cost of this. And sure enough, the intention of the author here was of this particular paragraph was to describe how more research could reduce the cost in the specific area of the tech costs of the fossil fuel dilemma. So you see how the intention flows from the focus, because it was about tech costs. So here we are so we go from the fossil fuel dilemma to the technological costs associated with it and sequestering carbon dioxide, and then specifically how research can reduce those costs, those technology costs. And that's what happens throughout this paragraph. Your own notes will look different had I not known that those notes were going to come up on the side, my stuff might have come up looking a little bit different. The point is not to somehow match some kind of Platonic ideal notes here. The idea is to have some ideas about these things that aren't crazy, that aren't wrong, so that you can use those when you move on to questions. All right, so longer passages have their own strategy, but luckily the strategy is mostly the same. So step one is finding the topic. That's still the same part. That's that general heading, the bookstore heading or the library heading. Finding the focus is the specific narrow thing, like the book title on the shelf. The author's point of view and the intention of the overall passage or paragraph are still the same. The thing that's different is that you're also meant to find the function of each paragraph. And let's talk about that just for a second. The reason you do this is twofold. One, it allows you to answer a certain very specific type of question, which we'll be covering today. Number two, it allows you to not go too far in the passage. If you're stopping at the end of each paragraph to say, and the chin stroking is optional. What did that paragraph I just read, what did that do? It makes sure that you're understanding what's going on, so that you don't read a 5-paragraph passage, get to the end and realize, I don't even know what just happened. Help. If you don't understand at the end of paragraph 2, you should go back and reread. So identifying the function at the end of each paragraph serves as a check internally for your active reading, and then allows you to answer certain question types, specific question types that are really about the functions of things. So by identifying these things as you go, you are preparing yourself. You're doing a better job of reading for answering all types of questions, and you are also preparing yourself for a very specific type of question. So the whole point is looking for how the author develops his or her argument. So what is the function of a paragraph? Let's talk about that. So look for how each paragraph develops the topic. So, remember our topic would be, beagles or dogs or whatever. So what does each paragraph contribute to that particular topic? You are not summarizing details. We already told you that before. I told you that before. Don't do it, okay? The details are there. You don't need to say that the War of 1812 was in 1812. You can just go back and look at it. What we care about is that paragraph 2 was about the War of 1812. And I was there to describe the historical background before we move into the consequences of the War of 1812. Okay, so functions are different from summaries. Putting yourself in the author's shoes. If you can take kind of a part of your brain and put yourself at kind of a meta reader level, if I were the author, I would be using this part to talk about my opponent's point of view before I knock it over. Okay, so understanding what it is the author might be trying to do with that, even if you aren't personally convinced. You don't actually have to be, you don't have to agree with the author to be able to put yourself in the author's shoes. And a function would be expressed as an infinitive. Answer choices are often expressed as infinitive, so in your own notes, it's helpful to do the same. So functions, here's a non-exhaustive and we're going to go through the whole thing list, which is to say I'm not going to go through this whole list. But the main point I want to have here is that note that some of these are things like describe, explain, overview. So those are neutral or scholarly points of view. An overview wouldn't necessarily be scholarly, but an explain might be. However, a function that involves the author's point of view coming out would be something like undermining or support, contradict, refute. So the author's point of view comes out simply in the act of providing something, providing an opinion about something, saying something is good or bad, supporting it or contradicting it. So watch out for stuff like that, and the verb you choose does make a difference. You'll come up with your own list of your favorite words that you use to describe functions, and some of them may be on this list, some of them may not be. It doesn't matter as long as they're not wrong. Okay. So an example of active reading would be something more like this. So we have this, this is from a longer passage. This one's like 5 paragraphs long. So entomologists have been fascinated since the early 20th century with the processes by which honeybees construct memories and how they pass on what they have learned to their hive mates. So here our topic looks like it's something related to entomologists, perhaps entomology or entomologists, the study of bugs, not words. So something along those lines would be our topic. Let's see. Recent research by Cornell University biologist Thomas Seeley offers new wisdom not so much about the mechanics of bee learning as about one of its more impressive applications. Building on work by the German behavioral scientist Martin Lindauer, who identified a form of nonverbal apian intercourse known as the waggle dance, Seeley spent decades puzzling over how bees reach a consensus on where to relocate their hives. Okay, so we've read the topic, the scope or focus, that's the same thing. What these entomologists are interested in particular today, which is bees. And sure enough, honeybees, bees, apian is the adjective form of relating to bees, bees. So yes, bees are totally the focus of the passage. And then the purpose of this paragraph is to introduce what entomologists care about, or how entomology cares about bees, namely the processes by which they construct memories and how they pass on those memories. And here, there's a little bit on the author's point of view. So this says that, hey, there's new wisdom. Well, if it's new wisdom and not new steaming piles of crap, then clearly the author thinks that Thomas Seeley's book has some merit or does some new cool thing. Okay, so that's an example of how much information you can get out of a single paragraph. Now, granted, beginning and final paragraphs are going to be more dense in this respect. They're much more likely to contain things that point to the main idea, things that point to the focus. But you can get a lot out of one paragraph, and your notes can reflect that. Okay, so each spring bees, there's our bees again, find their hive's food stores depleted and set forth in search of a place to establish a new one. This is no small task, and that's an example of the author editorializing, saying, wow, well, those bees, they sure do a cool thing. So the author admires bees, apparently. Okay. No small task is a hive that is too small, too low, or too exposed to the elements has far lower chances of long-term survival. Thus, while the next candidates to become queen of the colony are still gestating in the honeycomb, roughly 2/3 of the hive's population fly off and establish a sort of base camp on a nearby tree stump or mailbox, for instance, from which they disperse in different locations, returning sometime later to describe in movement the qualities and features of the potential new homes they have scouted. So, we pause a moment to kind of figure out what the function of this passage is, and it's clearly to describe these bees' habits. And there's a little bit on how they communicate, but this is mainly is bees' habits when they're looking for a new home. But there's more. All right. So, and so we'll just finish up this passage. According to Seeley's observations set down in Honeybee Democracy, the ensuing discussion resembles an active democratic process. The scouts that return with the most promising locations encourage other bees to go off and investigate the same places. As lesser propositions are eliminated and more support is given to a dwindling number of possibilities, the hive will eventually reach a quorum and be able to begin the complex migration process. So the point of this one is to show the kind of democratic process, to show, and so here the function was to show, again using an infinitive, to show what Seeley found, like democracy. And I'm not going to fill all this in over here, but you get the idea. Finally, while Seeley's paean to what he refers to as house hunting by honeybees helps elucidate an important part of the way another species lives, doing for bees what E.O. Wilson did for ants, as one reviewer put it, nonetheless leaves unanswered a number of equally fascinating questions, perhaps the most pressing among them, why there never appears to be competition between colonies over an optimal hive location. The answer to that may shed light on genetic differences and cultural preferences among bee families, which could in turn lead to biological conclusions applicable to humanity as well. Okay, so the second one, or the second paragraph, which is really the fourth paragraph, this one, we have this overall review saying, hey, wow, this was a pretty cool study, but it leaves some pretty big questions unanswered. So here's another element of the author's point of view that really this book is great, but it doesn't answer the questions that I really wanted, and I, the author, I didn't really write it, but pretending I'm the author, putting yourself in the author's shoes, you're saying, I like this book, but it doesn't answer the stuff that I really want to hear about, which is why this other stuff doesn't happen. So, the author's point of view, I guess we would call it mixed, and his intent probably to describe Seeley's findings, because the bulk of the passage is Seeley's stuff. So, Seeley's findings. Okay, so, those are the sorts of notes you would take on the passage. All right, let's do a little bit of practice here. So now we're taking it from the top without things already highlighted or anything like that. The notes I take might be different from the ones you would take. In fact, if you want to, you could take a moment, pause the video with this on the screen, take your own notes and see how they match up with what I come up with. All right, so the intentional introduction of iron to the upper ocean to stimulate a phytoplankton bloom is known as iron fertilization. Iron fertilization is intended to enhance biological productivity, which can have benefits that include the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. All right, so I would say that probably the main idea is going to be iron fertilization, and I'm going to abbreviate it because I'm lazy and I don't have time to write out fertilization over and over again. And for the focus, I would probably say the IF, the iron fertilization use in oceans. But let's keep reading, I could be wrong. Iron is highly insoluble in seawater and is often the limiting nutrient for phytoplankton growth. Therefore, supplying iron to iron-deficient ocean waters can create large phytoplankton blooms. A number of ocean labs, businesses, and scientists are exploring this with the goal of sequestering atmospheric carbon dioxide in the deep ocean and increasing declining marine biological productivity, which is probably caused by climate change. At best, iron fertilization could be almost sufficient to reverse the warming effect of about 1/6 of current levels of anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. It is notable, however, that carbon dioxide levels will have risen by the time this could be achieved. Okay, so the intent, I would probably say the author's point of view is that it could reduce the carbon dioxide. And I would say the intent is to probably the role of iron fertilization, role of IF. Maybe I should underline it to make it clear that's an abbreviation, or maybe I should have done this. Anyway, so I would say that that's the general idea. It doesn't have to be more specific than that. The notes don't need to be longer than that. Part of the reason mine is so short is that I didn't have that much room to write, but your mileage may vary. It didn't take long to take the notes, and we have a rough idea of what the function of, and this F is focus, not function. This is a one paragraph thing. So we had a rough idea of what was going on in there. So finally, on to the question types. So big idea questions ask about the central focus of the passage. So here's an example. The author of the passage is primarily concerned with. So these are the ones that will go to the intention of the passage, the thing that you have already determined in your notes. This is a very common question type, so figuring out that intention as part of your active reading basically answers a really common question type automatically and allows you to eliminate wrong answer choices in other types of questions. So it'll contain words like main, primary, central, key. Key itself is a main word. Idea, purpose, theme, goal, things like that. The incorrect answer choices are often too specific, like a detail from the passage, something that happens but was not the primary intent of the passage, or it'll be outside of the focus of the passage. So if we were talking about 2 breeds of dogs, a wrong answer choice will be some third breed of dog. Or since we were talking about iron fertilization, what if there's some other nutrient that could be given to phytoplankton to eat in their little phytoplankton world? That would be outside the focus of this particular passage, which was about iron fertilization in particular. So incorrect answer choices are either something that's in the passage or something that's bigger than what the passage was actually talking about. And then finally, the main idea usually lives in the first and last paragraphs. Not always. So this is why skimming is always a bad idea, always, unless you're out of time. It's usually in the first and last paragraphs, but isn't always. All right. So your method, refer back to the intention, which is, your note-taken version of the big idea of the passage. Eliminate the things that are too specific, eliminate the things that are too broad, outside what the focus of the passage was, and eliminate extreme answer choices. Sometimes the answer choices meant to attract attention of people who are guessing or skimming. We'll use extreme language talking about everything is always this way, or this is totally never going to work, or this is a surefire hit. Extreme language, it's not always wrong, okay? There are some cases where the passage provides ample evidence for you to say that something is always the case, or that this will never work. That is rare, and the more extreme it is, the less likely it is to be right. So your method, refer back to your intention, and then eliminate things that don't work for one or more reasons. If your intention, your summary of what the passage was doing is good enough, the right answer will actually often just kind of leap off the page or leap off the screen at you. You'll say, wow, well, that's totally what it was. So you can practice that. And have a prediction. That's what your intention is, in a way. That when you write down that prediction, write down that intention, that's your prediction for what the big idea question answer will be. But rephrase it in your mind once you kind of know, when you've read the whole passage. Have that prediction in mind when you're reading the answer choices. It makes you less likely to fall for traps. All right. So here's another real one. And we'll actually get a big idea question at the end of this. I'm just warning you in advance. So it is interesting to note that a year or more ago, a few deaths from bichloride of mercury poisoning caused within a period of 6 months a general movement toward protective legislation. So I would say the main idea is bichloride of mercury poisoning. And in general, we have let's keep reading. This movement was successful, and after a lapse of only a short time, the public was thoroughly protected against this dangerous poison. It will be observed that the financial returns from the total sale of bichloride of mercury The financial returns from the total sale of bichloride of mercury tablets could be but small. Had the financial interests involved been of a magnitude comparable with those interested in the manufacture and promotion of habit-forming drugs, I have often wondered if the result would not have been less effective and as prompt. Okay, so now clearly the focus is on the kind of protective measures and then the financial aspects of what the substance is that people are being protected from. Bichloride of mercury never threatened any large proportion of the public, and those falling victims to it merely die. Opium and its derivatives threaten the entire public, especially those who are sick and in pain, and with a fate far more terrible than death, a thraldom of misery, inefficiency, and disgrace. Okay, so that kind of continues that. So I would say the intent is kind of looking at the financial role in drug protection, I guess. I don't know. Something along those lines. It doesn't have to be exact. I just have to have an idea of what I think it's going to be about. The point of view would probably be that money matters. I don't know. Yeah, I'd say that's probably pretty good. Let's see how it turns out with an actual question. So here's a practice Grokka question from our treasury of questions. Select only one answer choice. Good to know. The author of the passage is primarily concerned with, so that means this is a big idea question. I told you this was coming. And remember, the author was primarily concerned with talking about how money affects how quickly, or that money probably affects how quickly and thoroughly the government will step in to protect people from dangerous chemicals. Because that's kind of what that was about, where bichloride of mercury was a specific example of, didn't affect a lot of people, and killed them instantly. So it was something very easy and for the government to say, hey, no more of this. Whereas something like opium, the government might have more trouble. That seemed to be the point. So, primary purpose, something like that. A, discussing the process by which protective legislation is enacted. We actually didn't hear anything about the process. We just heard that, hey, there was this tablets, and it caused problems. And then poof, there's legislation 6 months later. So, definitely not A. B, resolving a dispute between a concerned public and certain manufacturers. There was no dispute at all. So, thank you for playing choice B. C, discussing the relationship between protective legislation and financial interests. Okay, that sounds pretty good. We'll keep that one and check the other ones. Remember, you always read all the answer choices. D, resolving the discrepancy between legal and illegal substances. No, we don't actually hear about legal versus illegal at all. And then E, discussing the difference between bichloride of mercury and certain legal substances. So this is the only other one that should tempt us, because we do hear about bichloride of mercury, and then the author does say, well, I think it might have been different had there been this other drug. But we're not hearing just the difference. We're hearing a very specific difference, which is namely about protective legislation and the financial powers behind a given drug. So choice C is a much better example of what the author was primarily concerned with, because we don't hear about chemical differences or anything like that. It's more setting up this idea that money matters. So choice C. All right. So structures of ideas question is the other type we're talking about today. And so these are about how the author constructs what the main idea or intention was. So which of the following most logically completes the passage? It might be a sentence like, hey, so which would be the next thing that the author is going to talk about? So it may include questions about bold-faced sentences. What's this sentence doing in the author's argument? And for long passages, this is where focusing on your little function things where you say, hey, this paragraph did this function, this one did this function, this is where it ends up being, just extremely handy to have paid attention to that. Consider the way in which the author's argument unfolds. You should be doing that as you go. Like, oh, okay, here's where, again, the chin stroking is optional. Here's where the author is discussing the opponent's theory, okay? Making predictions at the end of each paragraph saying, well, what do I think is going to happen next? Just take a split second to decide. Okay, I think we're going to hear about theory number 2 now, because that seemed to be all about theory number 1. And then transition words can be your keys to identifying the flow of the argument. So 6 types of transition words. I'm not just going to read this list to you. You can pause this or come back to this slide later if you want to spend more time on it. But note that time words help establish a chronology more than just saying, the next month. Things like next or always, never, okay? Location, keeping track of spatial relationships. You may be asked to do that. Like, near this was this other thing. Emphasis, and this will be emphasis on the author's argument. Furthermore, this is the case. And this is to be contrasted with the contrast words. And though these are probably the most important ones, well, I would say contrast and summary are the most important ones to be able to note, but you should be able to note all of these. Cause and effect, as a result, so those are fairly self-explanatory. Summary, the reason those are important is because those tell you people's opinions, especially the authors, but maybe other people's in the passage too. So to sum up, or even just things like thus and therefore all bichloride of mercury should be banned, whatever. So pay close attention for this type of word. All right, so your method. Depending on what the question is asking, you may have to refer back to the functions of individual paragraphs or your intention, which was what the author's goal was. You're looking for transition words and making a prediction. As always, go into the answer choices with a prediction. It's easier to spot wrong answers. Even if your prediction is kind of fuzzy and vague, it's better than going in with nothing. Eliminate answer choices that are out of focus. And again, extreme answer choices are not usually right. Eliminate them or mark them in some way so that you aren't as tempted by them. If all that's left is extreme answer choices, you do need to consider them, or if the passage itself was extreme, but it's less likely. And again, a vague prediction is better than no prediction. All right. So we're going to ignore the highlighting for a second and just treat this passage kind of as it is here. To those who asked him why he did not go to Italy for his subjects, Georges Michel would answer, "The man who cannot find enough to paint during his whole life in a circuit of 4 miles is in reality no artist." This artistic creed was nothing less than revolutionary at that time in the early days of the 19th century, when the landscape painter regarded nature as unworthy of his brush unless it was bedecked with ancient temples and peopled with gods and goddesses. So if we were to identify this main idea, it's probably George Michel, George M. The focus, specifically Georges Michel's creed. All right, and we haven't gotten to the intention or the point of view yet. Gods and goddesses, or at least suggested Italy or some distant land. Georges Michel lived on the heights of the Montmartre in Paris. He walked out into the country and painted what he saw. His landscapes are actual studies of nature painted in the open air. As one of the first painters of paysage intime, Michel was a forerunner of Rousseau and the men of 1830. His narrow, subdued scheme of color establishes his relationship with the great Dutch masters of the 17th century. In France, however, his was pioneer work. He did not cater to the popular demand, and it was not until the World Exhibition in 1889 that his genius was generally recognized. Okay, so definitely, main idea was this dude. Sorry. Using the very formal scholarly terminology, this dude. Okay, so this artist, the focus was his approach, which was apparently pretty revolutionary. And I would say that the intent was to show to show that this guy was revolutionary. Point of view, I would say this is analytical. The author doesn't actually tell us that that he or she thinks that these paintings are great or that other people's paintings are great. Just that that this guy was really doing something different for his time. So that's what we get. And we have these boldface things, and so that comes from this. In the argument given, the two portions in boldface play which of the following roles. So let's go back and look at that and decide what role these are playing. So the first one, this artistic creed. What artistic creed? This thing about you should be able to paint your whole life's worth of stuff within 4 miles of home. Okay. So his artistic creed was nothing less than revolutionary in the early days of the 19th century. When the landscape painter regarded nature as unworthy of his brush unless it was bedecked with ancient temples and peopled with gods and goddesses. Okay, so the first one is clearly something that the author believes, that Georges Michel's approach was revolutionary. So the first statement is clearly some kind of conclusion that the author is drawing. And then the second one, that this is a time when the landscape painter wouldn't paint it unless it had, crumbling statuary with no arms in it or something, and ancient temples and blah blah blah. Okay, so the creed was revolutionary, conclusion, and then like something to support the idea that it was revolutionary. We don't have to get more specific than that. We just need to find something like that in the answer choices. So let's. All right. A, the first is a claim made by the argument in support of a certain thesis. That sounds good. The second is that thesis. No, the second thing was really supporting the idea that he was revolutionary, so it's not going to be A. The first expresses the thesis of the argument. Maybe, this is something the author believes. The second provides a counterexample. Oh my gosh, no. It's totally there to support the main thing. So not B. C, the first refutes a commonly held belief. I'm just going to stop there. It's not refuting a commonly held belief. D, the first offers a stance for the argument. Okay, that's something the author believes. The second puts it in context. Well, that sounds pretty good, but let's check E. The first expresses the argument's dismissal of an objection. The second provides support for the objection. No, it's not a dismissal of an objection. It was just something that the author thought, so not E. That leaves us with choice D. It's a stance for the argument, and the second puts it in context. Just to review, without the junk on the screen, that there's an artistic creed that was revolutionary. The author thinks that. And then we're hearing about this time when the average landscape painter didn't want to paint the landscape unless there were ruined temples and stuff. So that's a context. Totally the choice we just had. So the GRE verbal. You just finished the first lesson. Good job. We covered some of the basics, and in particular covered big idea questions and structure of ideas questions. These are some of the most common, some of the most fundamental to being able to handle the GRE verbal. So we started with those. And so, as luck would have it, we have questions tagged with those very issues in our Grocket treasury of deep in our vaults, our e-vaults filled with questions. We have questions tagged with either big idea or structure of ideas, so you can do targeted practice on those specific things. And as luck would have it, that's your homework. So before next time, if possible, do those problems and study every day. And it makes it a lot easier than cramming it all in at the end. You may have heard me give that advice before, but it's still true. Anyway, see you next time for verbal number 2.